Welcome to First and 10. My first take in 10 minutes. Sometimes more, sometimes less. Sometimes you get a penalty on first down and it's first and 20, but you get the gist of the show, First and 10, right? We've got a big one this week. It was Rivalry Week, and you can throw all of the data and trends and a lot of those things out the window, and we're going to show you some games that went against the trends of normal statistics and how you could look at them and draw conclusions. So coming up right now. Our first game was clean, old-fashioned hate. Georgia Tech, and we predicted that Georgia would run away with this one 45-17. We got the winner right, but it definitely was a closer game, I think, than anybody suspected. If I told you the stat line that Georgia lost the turnover margin 2-0, they allowed 200-plus yards rushing and had 3 times the penalties of their opponent, would you have thought maybe upset? I think in most cases that's a recipe for disaster. However, 156 yards and 2 touchdowns on the ground from Kendall Milton. And Carson Beck just seemed to make enough plays with the arm to keep the Bulldogs rolling, and the defense showed up when it needed to. The defense wasn't nearly as good as it's been in the last few weeks, and Carson Beck, quite honestly, he seemed out of rhythm. Now, he didn't have Brock Bowers or Ladd McConkey. Those are 2 big pieces to their offense, and it shows you how important they are to Georgia's success over the next couple games, or at least this next week against Alabama. So what this means is Georgia plays Alabama, and they win, and they are in the playoffs. Nothing else to be said about that. I'm sure Alabama, after their performance this week, is going to really need to improve on some things. So this could be an epic battle down in Atlanta for the SEC championship and a playoff berth, definitely for Georgia, possibly for Alabama too. What happened was total domination by the Horns in a 57-14 win. If I'm a Texas fan, I am extremely happy with that performance. The Red Raiders, they have a great ground attack, and Texas held them to 198 yards of total offense. That's right, 198 yards total. 528 yards of offense for the Longhorns. They won every metric that you could ask them to win, and this is exactly what you wanted to see. The Iowa State game, and Iowa State beating Kansas State certainly helps. I think the Longhorns look even better. What it means for Texas is you're peaking at the right time. Now, you're going to need some help to get in the playoffs. As it sits right now, you're going to need some help. And I personally think you're probably going to get some help. But you're going to have to beat Oklahoma State in the Big 12 championship game, and then you're hoping for a Louisville win, and you may be hoping for an Alabama win as well. That's a hard one. It's like a double-edged sword. You know, if you're the ceiling of Alabama, which a lot of people believe you are, then if Alabama beats Georgia, that certainly opens up another spot right then and there. So that Florida State game will be very interesting. I'm sure everybody in Austin, Texas will be watching these games very closely over championship weekend. All right, here's a team that Texas will be rooting for, is Louisville. They lost to Kentucky, effectively eliminating themselves from the playoffs. They ended up losing 38-31. We predicted they would win 30-24. This is one of those games that went against your normal metrics. They outgained the Cats 403 yards to 289 yards. But costly turnovers were way too much for them to overcome. Also, they lost the fourth quarter 17-7. That's right. Kentucky dominated the fourth quarter. Ray Davis had 3 touchdowns to spearhead that upset. So as I said before, Louisville's eliminated from the playoff picture, but they still have a lot to play for. Louisville is going to play for an ACC championship against a Florida State team that is without their star quarterback, and they have everything to play for. That ACC championship and a likely New Year's Six Bowl would be a huge achievement for that program. So I assume that they're gonna show up very motivated. They're gonna want to get this bad taste of a rivalry loss out of their mouth. And if I'm Florida State, this is not what I wanted to see the week before the ACC championship. And speaking of the Seminoles, let's get into the Florida Cup. That's right. The Seminoles ended up pulling that out 24-15. They went down to the swamp. They got it done. We thought Florida was going to win 21-17, and I said that if Florida State could win that game, I would be impressed regardless, because that is a good win, and I do stand by that statement. A little asterisk by that. is 224 yards of offense. Eek. That gives me pause for next week in the ACC championship. The offense did not look great against a Florida defense that was much maligned throughout the year. They are 65th, ranked at home, 129th, I think, overall. But that Florida defense has not been that good. That is far from an elite defense. I understand they were playing at home. I understand that Florida State had a lot of things going against them. Tate Rodemaker was knocked out of the game late, but he ended up coming back to finish. But one thing that would be encouraging to me if I'm a Seminoles fan is the run game. Trey Benson, he showed up when he needed to. And the defense is legit. That Florida State defense they've got to be one of the best defenses in the country. I really like the way that they play, evidenced by what they did to LSU earlier in the season. It's going to be a tough road, I think, for Florida State next week. But if they win, I still think they're in. I think they're still in a win-in scenario. So I don't know how you would hold out a potentially 13-0 ACC champion, how you could say they aren't one of the 4 best teams in the country, especially if they do it with a backup quarterback. This just goes to show me how good they actually were with Jordan Travis. So hats off to the Noles. If you're a Noles fan, you're probably just like me. You're not liking that offensive performance, but you got to be happy with the defensive performance, and you got to be happy that you were able to win a tight game, 24-15, a rivalry game at that. So we'll talk about the Noles and the Cardinals in the next show on our prediction show coming up later in the week. All right, now the Iron Bowl. Nick Saban, what can you say? The guy just wins. I'm sure this is not the way that old coach drew it up, but I'm sure he will also take it. Albeit it feels like a little bit like a loss, but guess what? You won. You advanced. We thought Alabama would win 28-21. What happened was they ended up winning 27-24. We thought it was going to be a tight game. I did not think it was going to be this close. You're down to 4th and 31, 4th and ball game, and you hit a 31-yard strike from Milroy to Isaiah Bond in the back corner of the end zone. Incredible finish with 32 seconds left. That also was set up by a muff punt from Auburn, and so the kid inexplicably slipped. It was the weirdest thing I've seen. He just slips, drops the kick. Alabama gets it. It just felt very Iron Bowl-ish. This Iron Bowl will be cemented in the history of this game for sure. What does this mean? Well, the Tide were anything but convincing. And that gives me not a lot of confidence in them heading into next week. We're going to talk about that on our prediction show. But it was enough to advance to the SEC championship game in Atlanta, where they'll take on the 2-time reigning national champions, Georgia Bulldogs. That game is going to be for a playoff berth, definitely for Georgia, possibly for Alabama. As I said earlier, I'm not convinced that they would get the nod over Texas at this point, especially with that showing. I think it would take something like them really dominating that game and, Texas maybe looking really bad, in some regard, I guess, in their last game. If you're an Alabama fan, you're certainly pulling for Oklahoma State in their game with Texas. But I think at the end of the day, what they need to focus on is beating a really, really good Georgia Bulldogs team that survived a scare of their own this week. Now we head out west to the Apple Cup. What we thought was going to happen was we thought Washington would beat Washington State 42-24. What actually happened was Washington won 24-21 in a game that was, I won't say it wasn't fully expected, because part of us said if they played down in the competition, we thought it would be a game early. I didn't think it would be this close of a game for this long. This is again, part of the theme of the day was Washington was outgained 381 to 306 yards. But they did win the turnover battle. So there was that. Washington State carved up the UW secondary for most of the game, and then UW had a couple interceptions. which were key. That really changed the complexity of that game. But UW's ability to make plays down the stretch, their coaching staff's confidence when the game is on the line or when in really crucial moments of each game this season, UW has performed 100% of the time in crucial situations. They just make the plays they need to win the football game. 4th and 1, I mean, this is incredible from a play calling perspective. 4th and 1, everybody thinks you're going to run a dive, and you run a reverse to Odunze, who goes for like 20 yards. Key play in that game-winning drive right there, but a great call. I mean, Ryan Grubb, he has to be the best play caller in all of college football, I would say. I mean, he's right up there. Jonathan Smith, is way up there too, but I would say he's got to be number one as far as play calling. Washington just really, they know themselves very well, and they just, like I said, make plays. So the defense, again, bend, don't break. And what does this mean? I mean, the offense, they struggled a little bit, but they did enough to win. And when the game was on the line, they drove down, kicked a field goal. So betting against Washington is a mistake. I've done it a couple times this season. They're going to be a tough out for the Oregon Ducks, who we'll talk about here next. But the Huskies have punched their ticket to the Pac-12 championship game. And for all intent and purposes, this is a quarterfinal, a national quarterfinal game that we're going to have out in Las Vegas this Friday. And that brings us to the Oregon Ducks, the Civil War. And what we thought was going to happen was Oregon was going to win 45-21. We thought they'd play pretty good defense and their offense would get rolling. And that's exactly what happened, but in a little bit more dominant fashion than what we were thinking. It ended up being 31-7. And so the Ducks were a team they were on a mission for sure. They held the Beavers to a season low 53 yards rushing. That's the number one rushing offense in the Pac-12, held to 2.2 yards per attempt. They outgained Oregon State 480 to 273. I mean, this reminded me a little bit of the domination that Texas had. Texas was probably a little bit more dominant, but Oregon was playing a much better opponent in Oregon State. The Beavers, if you just go off of comparison, if you're just looking at a comparison to the way that Oregon has played against teams that Washington have played, the common opponents, you could go in thinking this game is going to be a blowout. The problem is Oregon they've punched their ticket to the Pac-12 championship game, and as I just said earlier, this is a national quarterfinal game. So the winner, I believe, is in the playoffs. I don't see any way that the winner of this game doesn't make the playoffs. If you're Oregon, you've got to be really happy with how the team has played since the Washington loss. They've been dominant. They have not let up. They've held themselves to a standard, and they've played to that standard most of the time. I'll say save the USC game. That was more of a substandard game. And those games are the ones that would give you pause if I'm an Oregon fan, and makes me a little bit less optimistic because that's against a really good offense, right? You lost to the Huskies, earlier up in Seattle, really good offense. Just some things didn't go their way. And you struggled a little bit against, I won't say struggled because they dominated the USC game, but it was closer. It was a closer score, I feel like, than the game felt like. So there were certainly some things in that, some very uncharacteristic mistakes. And so if you're an Oregon fan, you got to hope those are cleaned up because you're going to need to play a clean game to beat Washington. I said before the Washington game in Seattle that I thought Oregon would lose a heartbreaker, and I thought that they would then be able to avenge themselves in the championship. We're going to get to that in our prediction show next week, later in the week. But what this means for everybody is Oregon and Washington, probably the best game on the slate for all of the championship games next week, and we're looking forward to watching that. And that leaves us with the game. That's right, Michigan, Ohio State. We thought Ohio State was going to win 24-20. What actually happened was Michigan won 30-24. I'll say what I missed on, I feel like, was the quarterback. play. I thought Kyle McCord maybe was going to play a little bit better than he did. And I know his stat line doesn't look all that bad, but the way he started the game, he threw, 2 costly interceptions. One obviously was the game, sealer. He was under pressure. He's throwing the ball up, probably lived to fight another down or something there. But the one early in the game, what appeared to be a squatting cover 2 corner, and he threw that little slant route and the corner picked it. That right there was a key play. First of all, it was a great play by the defensive back in Michigan, but also an ill-advised throw from McCord. And then you switch sides and you see J.J. McCarthy, who is just a seasoned, good-looking, athletic gamer of a quarterback. Kind of reminds me of Bo Nix a little bit. He enough with the feet to kind of scramble and create, makes good decisions, is not going to beat you. The Wolverines played really good defense, and they ran the ball well. That was the key for them as they outrushed the Buckeyes 156 to 107. The Buckeyes did outgain the Wolverines, but again, you lose the turnover battle, and that's where that game lied. So outgaining your opponents was the theme of the week this week, and losing, and that's what happened to Ohio State. Unfortunately for the Buckeyes, I think they are eliminated. I'm not seeing a scenario really where they can get in. There might be a couple far out scenarios, but that is going to be a tough ask for the Buckeyes to get in. And so they're likely headed to a New Year's Six Bowl. The Wolverines, again, they played great defense, gamer QB. They're physical in the trenches. And they have just shown that they could beat a very, very high-quality opponent in a tight game. And they can make plays. That drive that they went on towards the end of that game, that's a championship drive. That's what good teams do. They went on one. Washington went on a championship drive this week. It's what you're going to have to do if you're going to win championships, and especially if you're going to win playoff games. So I would say the Wolverines, even though I picked against them, they definitely have shown me that they deserve to be one of the top 4 teams. They will be one of the top 4 teams. I don't see any way, that I would be betting against them this next week with Iowa. So that is, I think, if I'm picking a lock for the playoffs at this point right now, it is the Michigan Wolverines. And that's all we have for today's show. What a rivalry week it was. Probably my favorite weekend of college football to date. It doesn't always happen that way, but it certainly lived up to the billing, the upsets, the tight games. There was a lot of good football, a lot of things happening. And for college football fans, you got to love the way this weekend and the way this playoff race is shaking out. Championship week. That's right. Championship week starts Friday. And you've got the Oregon Ducks and Washington Huskies Friday, and then you've got all the other major conference champions the following day on Saturday. We will have the predictions and previews, and we're also going to have the CFP reaction show. That'll be dropped on Tuesday/Wednesday, and then the predictions will come the day after, heading into next week. So smash that subscribe button if you would for us. Everything helps. Share it with your friends. Let us know how we're doing down in the comments section, and we appreciate your support. For First and 10, for Sports Idol Nation, I'm Josh Rodriguez. Sports is in our DNA, and I hope it's in yours too.